Free stuff? Well, maybe. You get a pension, get a free house, maybe TV set, mobile phone, all the good gear. Yeah, I don't know if I'd risk my life for that. But hey, if they were about to call me up, or I was in the army and sick of treading on landmines, that would be sufficient to make me want to leave the country and try a life in a country where I don't even speak the language. That's just the latest from Larry Pickering, the former cartoonist of the Australian. You've all heard of Larry Pickering, no doubt. Even if only a tenth of what he says is true, it's worth keeping an eye on it because it's the stuff the mainstream media just won't pass on to you. Now, Lord Monckton is speaking tomorrow night at the Parramatta Town Hall. I spoke to him for a couple of hours a few weeks ago. He's very clever. He has a colossal memory, but he doesn't know everything. He said the story about the Department of Homeland Security acquiring billions of rounds of ammunition, the figure varies between 1.6 and 2 billion. Many of those rounds are 9mm dum-dums, hollow points, banned by the Hague Convention for use in warfare. And everybody in America is saying, what the hell would they need that for? These are designed for use against American people. And Lord Monckton said, oh no, he looked into it and that was just an urban myth. Well, not anymore. Forbes magazine has an article about it. Sarah Palin has been talking about it. It's in the mainstream. In America anyway. It could take 20 years to get to the mainstream here. The story about voting fraud that I broke in 1988 took many years to get into the mainstream. The Herald allowed a little article about that called The Great Electoral Loophole. How you could vote many times on election day without being challenged because your name appears in every book in your electorate. That loophole was opened up, as you probably know, in 1984. And in 1987, when Bob Hawke won the election on a mysterious swing in the marginal electorates, the Labour Party heavies had a party. The late Frank Hardy was at that party. He told me personally before he died that he saw these guys clinking their glasses and celebrating what they regarded as the first time they'd swung an election by the use of fraud. They probably didn't use the word fraud. We use the word vote scam. That's the American word for it because it sounds good. And that was the Herald's offering at page 35 or something like that. They never followed it up. One of the biggest scandals in our history. The country that brought the world the secret ballot. Suddenly the whole thing is subverted and they made light of it. Even the headline, The Great Electoral Loophole, not something serious that should be looked at further. Nothing on the front page about that one. So it's either 1.6 or 2 billion rounds recently purchased and the documents are on the internet for you to check. Plus 2,600 armoured cars, armoured in that special way like a ship's hull, so if they drive over a landmine the force will be directed outwards. All for use in the United States. Did you read this in your friendly local paper?
No.
And before he was elected, Obama said that he was going to establish an internal army just as strong and as well equipped as their conventional army for use against Americans. But no one can imagine how you could get enough Americans together to be a threat to the government because they've been tapping all the telephones since the 1980s. Oh, that's another story we couldn't get the media to for 8 years. And then in 1996, Nikki Hager, a member of the Greens movement in New Zealand, put out a really big book, Secret Power, all about the computer systems that are tapping your telephones, monitoring your faxes, and computers listening to the telephone calls. So the media cottoned onto that one in 1996. I've been telling them since 1998, simply because someone working in the system gave me a call. He said, you're a journalist, you should be able to find out what I'm doing. He said, I've worked with ASIO, I work at the Department of Defence as a computer expert. He said, I'm now working on something that is like Buck Rogers in the 21st century, or was it the 25th? He said, this is incredible. And he was talking about 4A Herbert Street in St Leonard's. You heard of this one, have you?
Yeah.
The big building with no sign on it, it doesn't say who owns it. It was officially Telecom in the early days, in the late 80s. And it has a door through which you could drive a truck, a semi-trailer. It's huge. And there's surveillance all over it. And he said, and I've seen the diagrams of it, it is protected against all forms of eavesdropping, electronic eavesdropping. And this was designed in the mid-1980s. Its roof is designed to withstand a jumbo jet crashing into it. So the Americans were thinking in terms of people crashing planes into buildings years before 9/11. more than a decade. It has a guaranteed double power supply from the people who provide the power in that area. But if that fails, there is a battery backup. And every few years, some 40 tonnes of truck batteries are traded in on another 40 tonnes of truck batteries. And the trucks that deliver them go all over the place in a round robin. So no one really knows exactly what the trace really is. And when the ABC interviewed me 21 years ago, when my first book, The Fine Print, came out, they had me trying to get into this building with the armed guards behind the screen. They said, no, you haven't got an invitation, you can't come in. And they said to me, don't worry, you've got the protection of the camera. You're on camera now, so if you try, they won't do anything naughty while we've got the camera on. Well, thank heavens they didn't. But more and more armed guards with pistols in their holsters appeared behind the glass. I know there were a couple of journalists tried to get in to see what the thing was all about, journalists from the Manly Daily. They were chased off at pistol point. And the mainstream media pretended that there was nothing happening. Nothing happening at all. The secret was, we're not allowed to eavesdrop on our own people. So we will eavesdrop on the Americans, they will eavesdrop on us, and Britain and New Zealand, and then we just swap the tapes. That makes it legal. So much is going on that they're just not telling you. Now, there's an argument about disarmament which fits in with this Department of Homeland Security massive armament. And it goes like this. The authorities know that if all the able-bodied people in Australia were armed and trained after the Swiss model, we'd possibly have an army of 8 million people or so. Nobody could invade us. They could nuke us, but they couldn't invade us. Instead, they've chosen to try to disarm us. So you have to think, okay, that means they're more scared of us than they are of the Indonesian or the Chinese armies. Now wait a second, have we ever done anything violent that would make the government scared of us? No, we haven't, right? We're a peaceful lot. She'll be right. Okay, so why would they be more scared of us than an invading army? If you could imagine, we'd all have to go completely berserk to be more scary than an invading army. So they must have something in mind that is going to make us so angry that we become more dangerous than an invading army. The big question is, what is it that they have in mind? What does Obama have in mind that he has to build up his brown shirt army for internal use only? I'll leave it to you to work out what that might be, but it must be something pretty horrendous. Somebody once said that every nation is 3 meals away from revolution. I forget who said it. Some people say Voltaire. Whoever it was pretty smart. 3 meals away from revolution. With our lifestyle, without technology, it's hard to imagine anybody could be 3 meals away from anything. Chinese people, many years ago, before the revolution, had a saying. When they'd meet someone they hadn't seen for a while, I forget how they say it, but translated it said, have you eaten today? Not how are you, but have you eaten today? Can you imagine how hungry you would be? Hunger struck Argentina 12 years ago. I'm putting the stuff together for the book. I found something I'd photocopied. I'm not sure why I kept it. But it was IMF bails out Argentina. And it was around about the year 2000. IMF is going to lend billions of dollars to Argentina, and then they're going to bring in austerity measures, which they always do. And the IMF tells the government, look, get your rubber bullets ready because there will be IMF riots, as we've seen in Greece. And the media told people that everything is going swimmingly, no problems at all. But people in Argentina thought the guy next door got robbed and the girl across the way got raped and that kid went away and didn't come back, we don't know where he's gone, but it wasn't reported in the media. And then the penny dropped when a woman working for a television station went into the provinces outside Buenos Aires and went to a class of kids aged about 10. And she went up to one young girl. Hello, dearie. What would you like to be when you grow up? The girl burst into tears. She said, I don't care. I just want to eat something I haven't eaten for days. And the rest of Argentina thought, hello. Kids are actually dying of hunger in a country that used to have the highest standard of living in the world, just like Australia, over 100 years ago. And it's educational to see what the Argentine people did to work their way around austerity measures. You don't go out for entertainment, you don't go out at nights like Johannesburg. Law and order breaks down completely. And on the website he lists the various guns that you should have. He says you can't walk down the street with a rifle, but you should have a good gun that's reliable, a pistol. The most dangerous times are when you leave your home and when you arrive. And he tells his wife, do not let anybody in. Doesn't matter what the story is, you don't let them in. If you're living out on a farm, well, you might think you've got a certain amount of safety, but if they do get in, they can do what they like with you, because no one will hear you scream. And then Argentina came out of their recession, not so long ago, by selling soy products to China, of all things. But recently, they're back into strife. Back into it again. And you can imagine people in Argentina thought higher standards of living in the world, productive. We were once feeding Europe. Trouble is, when their money went down the gurgler, the farmers were selling food to Europe, but they weren't selling them to the locals because the locals didn't have enough money for it. Just as India has exported food while people are starving because the poor people don't have the money to buy it, and the farmer naturally wants to get the highest price, and all the bankers are saying you've got to export if you want to make money. And you go to that global market and you sell to the highest bidder. So the lesson of Argentina is extremely sobering. I don't know what their situation is there regarding private property. But just coming back to the looming ice age that James Lovelock warned us about 3 years ago, which some say is overdue, I can't see how private property concepts that we have are going to survive that. If you live in Melbourne, it might be irrelevant. If you live in Tasmania, forget it, you're too close to the pole. But if you're in Northern Queensland, Northern Territory, or the north of Western Australia, those are the areas that Indonesia believes belongs to them. As you may know, their map, top half of the map's coloured green, South Irium it's called. One day, son, all this will be yours again. But that will be the safe zone in a period of cooling. And we're going to have to share it with untold, perhaps thousands of millions of people, along with other land masses that are on the equator. And from memory, and I wasn't too good at geography, big land masses are not quite on the equator. There's not much there at all. And about the only civilization is Singapore. That's because they've got air conditioning. And just one thing about Agenda 21, they've listed on the United Nations websites and the sayings of people like Maurice Strong, who was in charge of the environmental unit at the United Nations at the time. Then I think he got caught with his hand in the till and he's disappeared to Beijing, and we haven't heard from him for a while. But the things you're going to have to give up which are unsustainable, having a house with a yard, having pet animals, having too many children, household appliances, air conditioning, gone. You will not be using much electricity. I think you get 26 litres of water each at the United Nations has its way. 26 litres. That's for washing and cooking and drinking and washing the clothes. 26 litres a day. That's what they think is a fair thing. We have to share it around. Water being a very scarce resource in some parts of the world. Is there anything I've missed that we have to... Oh, the cars, of course. Cars, forget that. Presumably they'll allow trucks to deliver food. Something like Soylent Green, probably, certainly. If not that, it'll be something vegetarian, because animals are unsustainable. We've got global warming to worry about, you see. So almost everything the mainstream media has been telling you has either been full of holes with the important stuff missing, or it's been an outright lie. The biggest lie of all being the threat that warming is a bad thing and that somehow it's caused by CO2. As Peter pointed out, the warming gives rise to CO2 about 800 years later. When Al Gore, you've all seen The Inconvenient Truth? When Al Gore stood on the scissor lift beside that giant graph, his two graphs of heating and CO2 were separated. Scientific, intellectual dishonesty. If you wish to compare things, you put the graphs together, different colours. Or one's a dotted line, one's a straight line if you don't have colours. Then you're able to zero in and see exactly which comes first. See if there's a correlation, which is the cause and which might be the effect. No, Al Gore separated them by several metres. So the people in the audience, looking back over millions of years, couldn't really see if that peak was in line with that peak. Well, they could see it was in line, but they didn't know which came first. And when you bring those graphs together, in every case you see the warming precedes the CO2 rise. And that's assuming CO2 is something to worry about, and that's assuming that warming is something to worry about, and that is the most absurd part of the argument. And then you had Rajendra Pachauri in Australia a couple of weeks ago. He flew all the way here for 24 hours. Wonder what the environmental footprint of that one was. Because he could have done it on Skype in front of his computer, couldn't he? He said, everything's up for debate now, so the world hasn't warmed for 17 years. And luckily the media passed that one on. No statistically significant warming for 17 years from the Hadley Institute at the University of East Anglia, which is the holy grail for the warmest. That's where they get their figures. And with all the extra CO2, the computers had said, you're going to get warming by now. The graph is going to go up, like Al Gore said, have to climb on the scissor lift to draw the graph where it's expected to go. And the Hadley Centre said, well, the UK Met Office, as a matter of fact, the Meteorological Office said, we expect it'll be another 4 years before there's any statistically significant warming. So they've all had to go back to the drawing board. Thank heavens we've got the internet. The mainstream media acts as if we didn't have the internet. They will say things which are easy to contradict if you do a bit of research. Sometimes you go to the BBC, or you might go to CNN or Forbes.com, and you can find a very different story. Why the journalists don't use the internet is completely beyond me. I know that they do use it, but they're very, very limited in the way that they use it. And why do the journalists mislead us? Generally, it's sheer ignorance. I discovered by accident a few years ago that we had a newsreader, and I've since discovered we had another one, graduates from I think it's Sturt University at Bathurst. You'd think they'd be educated people, being university graduates. First they had to graduate from school, although Paul Keating didn't. And I asked a trivial question. On a cloudless night, you're looking up at the stars. If you could move the moon out of the way, how many stars would appear? How many stars are covered by the moon, on average? It's a very, very trivial question. And the answer is 3, to the unaided eye. And this newsreader, this girl, didn't understand the question, because she didn't know the moon is closer than the stars. Sound of palm hitting the forehead. I said, if I were the Earth and you 1 metre away, if you were the moon, the nearest star that isn't the sun would probably be in Perth to scale. That's how different it is. She'd never bothered to ask anyone, what's that up there? How come I can't touch it? What are those little twinkly things? How could you go through school and university and not know something as fundamental as that? And one of my colleagues was going out with another of our newsreaders, and he put the question to her, and she didn't understand the question either, and for the same reason. But dumbing down the education is an entirely, it's another topic, but it explains why so many people in the media just do not get it, do not understand the science, don't ask the tricky questions. So we come back to this sustainability, private property. Bad news is private property probably won't be sustainable very long into the Ice Age.